Hello, welcome back to my channel. In this video you will see me make a damascus knife. First I start with grinding up the billet to make a clear surface. Then I restack it, cut it into several pieces and weld it together. Once the billet is all welded up, I put it into my forge and let it heat up until it reaches a red or orange color. When my billet is heated up, I put it under the fly press and compress the billet. This way I can make sure that all the layers are laying on top of each other perfectly and there is no room for oxygen to come in. Once I'm done with compressing the billet, I'm adding borax to the billet. The borax functions as a flux and will form a liquid shield around the billet, which will stop oxygen coming in between the layers. After that step, I bring my billet to welding heat. Once it's in welding heat, I'm giving it a few medium hard strikes, which will set the forge welds. Here you can see the borax flying off of the billet. After I forge weld the billet, I heat it up again, and then I start stretching it under my press. I'm using half round dies to get the best result while stretching. When I'm done stretching out the billet, I'm putting the billet under the flat dies of my press. With the flat dies, I'm trying to get out all the dents that the half round dies put into it. Making sure the surface is all flat, I'm letting it cool down in my vise to make sure there's no more stress in the billet. I keep restacking the billet until it reaches 120 layers of steel. Then I forge it out one last time under my fly press and bring it to about 4 mm. Now that the billet is fully stretched out, I'm starting on forging the shape of the knife. I start with bringing down the tip of the blade so that later on I have a nice long knife. When I'm done with forging out the tip, I'm using my angle grinder to cut in a little groove, which will later on make the isolation of the tang easier. The next step was isolating the tang of my knife over the round corner of my anvil. When isolating the tang, I'm making sure that the corners of my hammer will line up with the corner of my anvil, so I'll get a nice even result. After I finished forging out the tang, I realized that my blade got a bit of a curve. I tried fixing that curve with a wooden mallet, but because I didn't have a wooden mallet, I just used a wooden stick. Here you can see me forging in the distal taper into my kitchen knife. A distal taper makes the cutting much easier. When doing that, I switch to my other anvil, which has a really nice flat face and also sharp corners, but it's a bit louder than the other one. I'm also wetting the face of the anvil to make sure that the scale will pop off and no slag or scale will be included. After I made sure the knife is all nice and straight, I'm giving it a temper, which means I'm heating it up to 850 degrees in my forge and let it cool down in the air. Here you can see me quenching the knife. I'm heating it up to about 850 degrees and quenching it in warm oil, which will make sure that it's nice and hard. Sadly, I lost the footage of grinding my knife, but here you can see me hand sanding. When hand sanding, I usually start with about a 150 grit and I finish to about a clean 400 grit before I start etching. I also forgot to record the process of tempering the knife. I put it into my oven for 2 hours, leaving it at about 200 degrees Celsius. This process will also make sure that the blade loses some of its hardness, but it will get nice and flexible. You can see the flexibility of the knife in my video, where it bends down but also gets back to its original point. Now that I'm done hand sanding, I'm degreasing the blade, making sure that there's no more fingerprints or fat on the blade, which will stop the acid from etching. While the blade is etching, I'm starting on making the handle of the knife. Here you can see me cutting off a piece of ebony wood, which will later on be a spacer. For the back part of my knife handle, I'm using stabilized plum wood. I sent this wood to my friend Tim from Spyro Knives, who stabilized it for me. Now that I've finished drilling in the tank slot, I'm starting to glue the handle all together. I'm using epoxy to do that. I also made a little copper guard for the knife, which I thought would fit good with the red plum wood. After the gluing, I started rough shaping the handle. I'm starting with a 60 grit belt to do so. From here on, I'm working my way up from the 60 grit to the 80 grit to the 120 grit and finally to the 400 grit Trizac belt. Sometimes shaping handles can be really difficult, but in my case I'm just going for a traditional Japanese kitchen knife handle, which is pretty basic. But if I go for like chef knife handles, I'm trying to do that all by hand using files and sandpaper. After finishing the knife handle on the 400 grit Trizac belt, I gave it a bit more hand sanding and brought it up to a 600 grit finish. After that, I let it soak in some linseed oil just to bring out the beauty of the wood. Finally, I'm not quite happy with how the knife turned out, but it's already sold, so I guess the customer is happy with it. Please let me know your opinion in the comments below. Thank you for watching.